Welcome to Black and Psych, and thank you for coming to our event today. Who is Black and Psych? Black and Psych is a platform to promote visibility, community, and networking opportunities between Black professionals and trainees across the field of psychology. We seek to celebrate, amplify, and support Black voices in psychology and to encourage dialogue around the intersections of psychology, race, social justice, and equity. What we are here for. The Black and Psych organization is founded to one, promote the visibility of Black professionals and trainees in the field of psychology, two, create a community and network of established and aspiring Black psychologists for connection and future collaboration, and three, encourage and hold a space for dialogue around the intersections of psychology, race, social justice, and equity. Who we are here for. Black and Psych is founded to promote visibility, community, and networking opportunities between Black professionals and trainees across the field of psychology, inclusive of all intersectional identities. This is Black and Psych's current team, and you're currently hearing from the current president, Lauren Kendall Brooks. If you're interested in joining our team, please send an email to blackandspsych@gmail.com, visit our website at blackandspsych.org, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram. Also, the QR code listed on the right side of your screen will also take you directly to our website. Thank you, and I hope you would really enjoy today's seminar.
I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Kenya Oduor, and she'll be teaching us how to unlock people-centered progress in qualitative research. If you guys have any questions throughout the sessions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll answer questions throughout the session. Take it away, Dr. Oduor.
All right, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you are. Again, I'm Dr. Kenya Oduor, and today we're going to talk about qualitative research from an applied perspective. And I'm coming out of industry and consulting, so a lot of my examples and experiences are going to be very, very impactful around how you take action. So today we're going to cover my journey. What is qualitative research, which many of you know what qualitative research is. We're just going to reiterate that and talk about what that means in terms of that mixed methods, looking at quants and how they relate to one another, understanding people in the context of systems. So everything that we work with are systems, whether they're the people and processes that we are a part of, or the actual computer systems or technology. The case studies are woven in the conversation, but I just wanted to call out that I will talk about some of my experiences. We'll have a little bit of an activity. And again, looking at that mixed method value, why designing for insight is so important, and the ROI of qualitative research in being able to not only gather that data and report it, but also act on it. Okay, so we'll cover these things. Again, the order might be a little different than what you see here, but I want to make sure that we talk about those things. So just as an example, before I jump into things, a project that we worked on years ago in my consulting realm was with a medical device company, and we were looking at identifying barriers to the medical device sales and the usage of this device. So a lot of times I'm going to talk to you about our stakeholder. Who was the person that actually needed or wanted our services? And in this instance, it was the vice president of sales within this medical device company. And this individual wanted to know, hey, my salespeople are out in the field, they're selling this device, which is a $70,000 device, one device, 70,000 US dollars. So when you think about your customer purchasing that device and not using it, the VP of sales wanted to understand, why are they not using this device? Why are they investing so heavily in something that they're not even using? And what can we do as a company to improve that sales, marketing, and training collateral, but also the process. So what's going wrong in all of what we're doing outside of the device itself, because the device was revolutionary. And so what we found, so let me step back before I go into what we found. Let me take that results away. So we went out and conducted qualitative interviews. So we had to recruit and interview physicians that align to that workflow. So if you can imagine, if any of you are familiar with kidney disease or kidney failure, you go from a diagnosis to getting a procedure. In many cases, it involves dialysis. And then you have to go to the dialysis, or you get the procedure done, and then you go to dialysis. So we had to talk to physicians in every stage of that journey, that patient journey, and we talked to patients. Whenever you do qualitative research, from my perspective, you want to look at what we call both sides of the coin. So you're going to understand or interview people inside of an organization who are doing the work, but also the people who are doing the work on the end as a customer. So they may be interacting with the same systems and processes, but their perspectives are going to be different based on the role that they play. So for example, anybody out here work on cars? How many of you have worked on a car or done anything on your car? So if you think about working on your car, you as someone that's troubleshooting and repairing and fixing your car, your perspective is going to be different than if you're a driver. Okay. So when we do these projects, we want to understand both perspectives in the same journey. Okay. So what we found from doing the interviews and understanding the workflows and the challenges and that sort of thing, we learned that, first of all, physicians weren't even using this device because they weren't getting enough patients who were good candidates. So that meant that the referring physicians were not actually incentivized to refer patients for this procedure. Okay, so when you think about that, if you have this device, but say only 1 out of every 10 patients that comes to you is a candidate, that doesn't even mean that they're going to move forward with it or you decide to move forward with it. It's just a candidate. That means that you're not getting enough referrals to even consider in using this device. So we were able to identify opportunities in that regard. What we also learned in looking at the other end of the procedure was when you go to dialysis, the dialysis technicians were not trained on how to work with the new anatomy. So this device made it so that you did not have any sort of mark or lump or anything on your arm. So the dialysis technicians would look at the person's arm and say, something's not right. Let me send you back to the doctor. The doctor would say it's there, they just don't know where. So we were able to find an opportunity to do something as simple as suggest to the physician that they take a marker and circle on the person's arm and take a picture of their arm so that when they go to dialysis, they know what to look for. Okay, so what we realized in that process was not only was the device useful and helpful, the challenge was the referrals, but also on the other end, the technicians. And patients were not aware of this opportunity. And because they weren't aware of it, they didn't know to ask for it. Okay, so in all of that insight that we gleaned from this project came from qualitative interviews. Okay, so a little bit about me. I am the CEO and founder of Lean Geeks. I started my company about 8 years ago. We are Lean Geeks because we are doing research, but we are lean in the way that we go about doing things. We know that we have to work with customers or clients that are looking to get things done efficiently. And so we have to go about things with sometimes without the full rigor of what you would do for an academic research project. Okay. We have to geek out because we've worked across so many different industries. And so that's why we're Lean Geeks, because every time we work with a new client, there's something that we're learning about that particular problem space or industry. Okay. Coming out of industry really, really helped me to understand what matters to our customer. So we understand that cost and time and outcomes and how they can apply that information is very important. So as a psychologist, I have to understand that we're not just doing this research to report results, we're having to present something that is helpful and actionable to our client. My doctorate is specifically in human factors psychology and industrial engineering. I hold patents, publications, that sort of thing. And I'm an adjunct in computer science at North Carolina State University. So if you have questions related to any of my experiences, please feel free to ask those as well. All right, so let's kind of level set. And again, interrupt me if there are questions that come up, but let's level set and talk about what is qualitative research. So when we think about qualitative, we think about the fact that you are trying to understand individuals' lived experiences. What are those things that matter to them? What are the pieces of information that they're using? Who are they working or partnering with in the context of this particular space or problem? And so most of the work that we do involves some level of observing people, interviewing them, or reviewing the information or things that they work with and utilize. And it's the why. So whenever you think of qualitative research, think about the fact that you are trying to glean out the why behind something that you might see in data or a phenomena that you see that you want to study. I always look at research from the standpoint of the 5 W's and an H, or the 4 W's and an H, not the 5. Does anybody know what the 4 W's and an H are? Okay. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. It is 5 W's and an H. I just ate lunch, so I got to get it together. So whenever you're conducting and Raywo, and you'll have to tell me if I'm mispronouncing your name, I apologize. We always want to go at qualitative research with a line of inquiry and observation around the 5 W's and an H. Okay, so make sure you take note of that. That means you want to understand who's involved, when are these things happening, why do they do things this way, how are they using different artifacts. So the modification of the 5 W's and an H will take place, but you want to make sure you cover all areas of that problem space. Okay. So that's a rule of thumb that you can use when you're doing that sort of work. All right. So when we think about the role of qualitative research, it is very, very important in systems and technology. I started my career out while I was in graduate school working in IBM software group. You want to talk about overwhelming and intimidating. So my responsibility was to understand how system administrators use the technology that we build. And so that meant I had to understand who are systems administrators, what is the job that they're doing, how does the technology that we build help or support their workflow, what other tools are they using, how do they communicate with other people? So that's where you start to get into those 5 W's and an H and understanding those things in that context. And so we, the team that I was on, we had to understand those aspects of systems administrators in order to then take that and figure out where does our software help or hurt their goals. Okay, so everything that we do in applied qualitative research is to look at what are individuals' goals? What are they trying to achieve? What are they trying to accomplish? And the system or technology that you have an influence on, how can you make it more seamless? How can you reduce the friction? How can you make it something that supports someone's ability to get something done? Or if you can't do that, think about how many times you have used technology that didn't work for you. What did you do? You put that technology or that system down and you did things differently. Okay. So qualitative research builds in or brings in that empathy when you think about systems that you create. And we want to make sure that the people who create those systems remember that there are people on the other side of it. And you want to then bring to the table that context, that emotion, that where are those frustrations? Where is the confusion? Where is the complexity? Those are the things that you're looking to identify and figure out how to address. When we think about, so a lot of the work that we do at Lean Geeks is related to technology and systems, but it's also about operations and services. So again, it's those two sides of the coin. When you think about an organization and the people within that organization that run the operations, they are performing actions, they are showing behaviors. And so you have to understand their workflows, where in their workflows do things work versus not. So how many of you have had, you think about to your first job. My first job was at Wendy's, the fast food restaurant. And I can remember they put me on the fry station, and I can remember within the process of operating that fry machine, they didn't have the digital ticker that would count down, how long the fries should stay in the fryer. I was told to wait 10 minutes. That was frustrating. If I got distracted and I started giggling with my coworkers, guess what? I ruined the whole batch of fries. So that is where you then introduce the timer or something that might turn off the fryer. Things that help people in the context of their workflows. Those types of things can only come from qualitative research, where you're asking people about what they do or you're watching them while they work to then understand where are those inefficiencies, where are those errors taking place, where are those accidents occurring. Okay. This is also how you elevate those hidden perspectives or opportunities that you did not know existed. Okay. So when we think about applied psychology and the value, you have an opportunity to utilize that skill set, not only in the process of creating tools and technology or tangible things, but also in the process of defining and improving operations and services as well. Okay. So we're gonna jump into this activity. Wow, I feel like I've talked so fast that we're already into the activity. So we're gonna go into an activity. Before we go into it, what questions do you all have for me? No questions. That means I got I was so thorough in things that no one has any questions for me. Any comments around this? How many of you realize you're doing this in the work that you do today, but you didn't know what to call it, or you didn't realize it's a thing? And what are some of those things that you're doing in the work that you do today that you maybe didn't realize were qualitative research or formalized qualitative research activities? Okay, so a lot of you have an opportunity to use these. Can you see value in some of the work that you're doing today? Can you see the value of doing these sorts of things? Give me some examples of what you can do. Interviews and observations. Absolutely. Anything else? So tell me some more specifics about some of those things that you're going to do in terms of how you're going to do that work to get engaged with people in those interviews and observations. What are some of those things you're going to do in your user research? So for example, you're going to go and sit and observe people get on and off the bus. And you're going to see where people are not prepared to pay with a card, but they have money and they realize they can't get on the bus. So are you going to observe people in the context of that particular workflow or challenge and see that opportunity to use that information to help inform an improvement or a change? So do you all have any context or examples that you see today in some of the work that you do or the things that you experience yourself? Okay. So I want to jump into some of your comments, and I really appreciate you guys putting these comments in there. So I want to talk, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more later. When you all conduct surveys, what comes out of surveys? What do you get from surveys? You get data, right? You get numbers, you get pretty much ones and zeros. How many of you have had to code your data? And when you take and you code your data, in a lot of cases, you're coding ones and zeros. Lots of text. That's right. So when you think about surveys and the text and the ones and zeros, what is missing from that data? Jason, you want to come off mute? Go ahead.
Oftentimes I feel like I'm missing the why, the context.
That's exactly right. You're missing the why. So when in the context, exactly. So when you guys think about things like surveys, feedback forms, things where people are not interacting with you and you don't have an opportunity to ask those five W's and an H, what you're getting is a glimpse into where the opportunity lies, but the why behind that opportunity doesn't exist. The context doesn't exist. This is why qualitative research is so rich and so much a part of a mixed method project. So, where a lot of you are doing quantitative, really heavy quantitative research, or you're doing quantitative work in general, even if it's not research, that qualitative, and we'll talk later about some examples and how I've done this in my experience. You take your quantitative and you are then able to take that information and figure out, where do I need to understand the why? How do I create a loose script, moderator's guide, or a script to help me ask the right questions? Okay. So you want to think about, how can I do that based on what I saw in my survey or my form, that sort of thing. Does that make sense to everyone? Do you all now see the differences? The nuance, exactly. You want to understand the nuances. Because if I tell you on a scale of 0 to 10, I don't like chocolate ice cream, and I tell you it's a 3 out of 10, why don't I like chocolate ice cream if I put that in my survey? You don't know why. You don't know why. You have to ask me. And you have to then go to me as a respondent and say, why is it that you don't like chocolate ice cream? I don't like it because it tastes like dirt. I don't like it because it's too sweet. I don't like it because we never ate it growing up. And so I don't even, it's unfamiliar to me. So that's where you start to get into the opportunity to dig deeper, to understand, is there something cultural in the context of the person's responses? Is there something that you can influence or change? Or is it just a part of people being people? Okay. Sophia made the comment, yes, but hard to approach the why. Sophia, you want to come off of mute and tell me some more about what you mean there?
Sorry, I don't have a very good example now.
Mhm.
I can only think about when I was in the team and we were doing an AI emotional chatbot, and
Mhm.
we tried to give survey to people to make them rate, like how much do you like the chatbot, and
Mhm.
give us one instance that you like it the best and one instance that you really don't like it.
Mhm.
I just figure it's hard. Like our boss keeps saying that you have to, like find the point that will keep people to come back and reuse this product. But it's really
Mhm.
hard just to, find like why they don't like it or why they like it, or like the reason is really superficial. Like they would say the AI is too superficial in understanding my emotions, or it's not like
Mhm.
being emotionally supportive, like giving this very general reasons, and it's really hard to approach like the truth underneath.
That's a really, really good example. Thank you for that, Sophia. So I love that example because there's a lot to unpack there. So first thing, when you think about, and a lot of you, usability testing is one of my my skills that I possess in that qualitative research. So when you think about introducing or presenting to someone a technology that you're designing or creating, and you ask them, and Sophia, I'll ask this question. When you ask them what part of it did they like and dislike, were you asking them that after they finished using it?
Yeah, we don't force them to use it. Want them to use it under a natural context. So some of them might
Mhm.
only been using it for once or twice only.
Oh, so we've done that sort of thing before. And one of the ways you look at getting that information is diary studies. Did you all use any sort of format like a diary study?
No, we did not.
Okay, so a diary study is where you put that technology in the hand of your participant and you ask that participant to use this tool or system and to give you feedback in the context of use. So, for example, you don't want me to try a toothbrush that I use when I wake up in the morning and then I give you feedback in the evening. You want to make sure I use that toothbrush when I'm supposed to use it, and that I give you that feedback as close to the time of me in the context of me using it. So with that AI example, best practices that you want to consider in qualitative research are reminding people to use this tool. So when we did a diary study similar to getting people to use the technology, we sent them a text reminder just 3 times a day. And we said, hey, time for you to go look at your Android phone and check out blankety blank and tell us what you think. So they would go and they would check out this technology. It's a bit contrived. We would have them check it out. And immediately after that time, we sent them a video feedback system. I think we used Video Ask, that allowed us to record our face saying, hey, you just used it to look at such and such this morning. Tell me what you think about it. And they could respond by either giving us a text response or a video response, or they could type it into their computer. So that allowed us to collect that data, right? But after we collected that data, we still had to conduct qualitative interviews, because what we're getting is their impressions in the moment. Those impressions then allow us to write a script to ask questions, follow-up questions about what they responded. So when in the scenario you just described, if you think about asking me about something I used yesterday, I can't give you the richness of my responses, because I may have forgotten some of the things that frustrated me. I may have forgotten those things that I loved about it, because I'm now looking at the big picture or the collective rather than those little points of friction or those sticking points that I didn't enjoy. So you have to ask questions in the context of use in some instances. You may have to remind people, or it is still an experiment. So you do have to prompt people to interact with something in some cases, or to give you that feedback and context. But that's your quantitative data that now you can go and look at that data and say, several people said they did not think it really read my emotions effectively. Okay, let's follow up with them and ask why. Okay, when you think about how a human being does it and the way this AI did it, what's different for you in between the two? So sometimes the way you ask your questions can elicit that helpful response or not. But you don't want to bias them. Okay, you want to be very careful about inserting any sort of bias. Thank you for that example, Sophia. Did you have any other questions or comments about that?
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Good, good. Okay, anybody else have any scenarios before we go into some breakout rooms? And we have recorded, Jocelyn said, we have recorded interviews while they walked us through our app as if they were alone. And then we guided them through specific features that they hadn't on their own. And what happened in that case, Jocelyn?
Yeah, it was a lot. It was all recorded via Zoom, so we could get the reaction, and then we can type and transcribe it in a later point. But we got a lot of the pros and cons about certain features, with how they understood them, what was the purpose of those features, if they could get them right away from their experience at the moment. We got a lot of feedback on like how people will interact for the first time with the app, in order for us to modify the app to make it more user-friendly. Because it was like, oh, I wish your app had this. And we're like, we do.
It does. Right, it does.
Here, like you'll see it. And then they're like, oh, the description made me think it was something different. Oh, you didn't interact it because you didn't think it was going to do what you wanted in the first place.
Right. So what did you all do with that feedback?
We ended up implementing on the app in terms of adding signals to direct people, or more link across the pages. So just, it's right there, you just need to hunt it. But we could have mentioned it in the intro already when we're giving a description of what people could do with this app. We could have just already hyperlinked these certain features that we wanted people to be directed towards.
That's right.
We added more text and shortened text, especially because they were too wordy and people will not read them.
That's right. You just took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, how many of us, we get something from Amazon, it comes to the house. How many of you pull out that manual and read it? end to end? Not really. Or you get a new app on your phone. How many of us read all the knowledge base in the text? None of us. So what you have to think about when you get feedback, thank you for that example, because that's a really helpful example as well. When you think about people not recognizing the features that are in your app, there's several things to unpack with that, and that like gets me giddy, because the first thing is a study that was done in 2019 by a company called Pendo. They identified that 80% of software features do not get used. So you have a lot of software tools out here where people are only using 20% of the functionality. So you can unpack that in qualitative interviews to understand, is it because they're hard to find? Is it because they are doing or solving this in a different way or with a different technology or tool? Is it that the way you've designed it is not user-friendly? It's not usable. So you have to, in your qualitative interviews, those are the types of questions you're trying to get answers to. Why aren't people using it, or why aren't people finding it? And I think the really good aspect of your response around what you did with that data, that is the whole point of qualitative research, is to be able to use that information to figure out, do we change the design? Do we put more information? Do we say this feature? So I can give you a good example. I worked with a team. They were 1 year behind schedule on a software project, on a mobile app. They had 5 what we call epics. So 5 big features they were trying to put in this mobile app, and they were 1 year delayed. So when you think about the cost of having a development team and all of the other teams focused on these 5 pieces of work, 1 year means that they've wasted millions of dollars. So we were asked to come in and help to understand, why are we so off schedule? Why can't we work well together? And what are the right set of features for this app? We started with understanding or talking to their customer and understanding, hey, customer, do you use your app today? And if they added these 5 new features, would you use them? How would you use each feature? And what's the priority of these 5 features? Which ones are most important to you? All of these came through qualitative interviews. And we drew a few pictures and shared pictures with them. What we learned from that project, of the 5, customers only wanted to see 3. So they had wasted their time for over a year working on 5 pieces of work where they only needed to focus on 3. And the customers were able to tell us. So for example, this was an app for a health insurance company. And the health insurance company thought people are going to look for a new doctor on an app. They thought that people would go in there, try to search on their zip code or their address and find a primary doctor nearby. Guess what? The men, the women, old and young, all said, I call my mother. I ask my mom. So they didn't need that as a feature, because people are going to ask their mother, even if their mother doesn't live near them. So those are the kind of things you can't get from a survey. You can't get that from just having people use it. You have to actually talk to them to understand. Okay. Jason, I want to hear your scenario.
Yeah, thank you. So I study the electrical activity of queer people of color. And something I've included is a survey on community connectedness and belonging. But connectedness and belonging is quite variable, right? And something I noticed is that there was a discrepancy whether I was able to perceive if this was at the macro level or the micro level, right? I, as a queer person, could say I belong, but that could mean to the broader queer community in the world at a global scene. But then in my exact community, whether that's because it's rural or whatever the variable is, I don't belong because there's not spaces for me. And the scale wasn't nuanced enough to get at those differences, right? And so I decided to include 2 debrief questions just to get a perception of what you were thinking about when you were answering that question. But I think there, as people have mentioned, I struggle with, how do I know what why portion is the most important for me to ask?
That's a really good example. And I would say that what the way you just described it in terms of the macro versus the micro, in all of the qualitative research I've done throughout my career, you have to understand both. So you want to make sure that you understand what belonging means to me at a macro level, because that's going to have some implication on, like, where am I geographically? What country? What is my language? What is that culture at a macro level? But then, like you said, at a micro level within my specific community, is it a homogenous community where I am someone who's very different than everyone else, even though I feel like I belong? So you need to understand both, because if you were to think about what are the outcomes of the work that you were doing?
So I was looking at family connectedness, specifically in relation to electrical activity in the brain, um,
Mm-hmm.
looking at how individual emotional experiences influence neuroresponses to negative and positive images and words.
And so ultimately, I would presume that you want to understand someone's general well-being based on that electrical activity. What does that mean in terms of someone feeling comfort, safeness, support, that kind of thing? And so when you think about that, that then allows you to say or infer from your findings that even if I feel like globally I am a part of a community, if I don't feel it within my micro community, then I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel loved, whatever that might mean. And so those are the kind of things, to your point, those debrief questions are really, really, really necessary in order to tease out, because you don't want to throw all of it away and say, oh my gosh, I don't see the right level of electrical activity at the micro and the macro. You don't want to throw it out and say none of it is good. You want to figure out or tease out those nuances. And that's a really good example in terms of then how do you provide recommendations? If this was a publication, how do you look at that from a recommendation standpoint in terms of what to see or understand or provide to individuals within that population? Awesome. Any other questions or comments? I'm loving these comments and the scenarios around the work that you guys have. Any more that you all have or want to share before we jump into breakout rooms? These are the safe breakout rooms where you're not like thrown into a room with someone or like a little table. You're in a virtual breakout room. So what we're going to do is put you all in random breakout rooms. And Janessa, I think you are going to put people in rooms. Let me see how many of you are on the call. We have about 15 or so, 16 people. So let's do groups of 2. And there might be one group of 3. And oops, I'm moving slides and
Yeah, I'm working on it.
sorry about that. Okay, so what I want you guys to do is go into groups and you're going to talk about your favorite thing. So I want you to talk about to the other person. I want you to share. I'm not sure why my slide is not showing everything. It's supposed to ask for you to share your favorite thing, whether it's a hobby or a physical object or a place. And so the other person, that's the listener, I want you to ask questions to the other person. And you're going to, let me see if I take this out of share mode, maybe it'll let us see the slide. I want you to, there we go. So you're going to have 5 minutes per person in the hot seat. And I want you to answer questions about your hobby or favorite thing. So that means that the person who's listening, you're going to be asking questions to the person, and you might want to take notes. This is where, if you're not a note taker, you better be one, because I'm going to put you on the hot seat when we come back so you can share what you learned about the other person. And we're going to just talk through a little bit about what the differences are and what you see coming out of those conversations, and maybe the richness of maybe what you might have missed. Okay? Any questions before we jump out into the breakout rooms? So 5 minutes of being the person answering the questions, and then 5 minutes of you being the person that asks the questions. All right, Janessa, whenever you're ready. All right, welcome back, everyone. How did that activity feel? How did you all think it felt? You can write it in the chat. Any comments? No comments? Or you guys like, why did you make me do that? So,
Most people.
interestingly enough, it was a nice ice-breaking activity. That's a really good point, Sophia. And interestingly, a lot of people jumped off because we had to do this, which that's a really interesting behavior. And so you think about, of course, people are multitasking and they're like trying to listen in while they're doing other work. But you think about with qualitative research, you have to get comfortable with talking to people you don't know. So I'm one of those people that my kids have to tell me to stop talking to the person at the bus stop while we're waiting, because I will strike up a conversation with anyone. And part of being a skilled qualitative researcher is that you have to get comfortable with talking to people you don't know and developing or building a rapport with those people, because they have to feel comfortable talking to you. But you also have to understand how to take conversations and navigate going down the path of what you need to learn about, going off on a tangent, coming back. You have to be skillful at that to be a good qualitative researcher. Okay, so Sophia and I were in the same group. So first off, we're going to spend just a few minutes if anyone wants to share. I want to say, first of all, I looked up and got the best interviewee in Sophia, because when you're conducting qualitative research, there is nothing more beautiful than a person who shares freely without you having to pull it out of them. And immediately, Sophia jumped into talking about her love of dance, the type of dance that she's into. She talked about urban and hip hop dance. She does it for workouts. She allows her dance to tell a story of the music. And she shared a lot of detail around that. I was able to ask her a few questions around why dance? When did she start dancing? If she had all the money and time in the world, how would she use that towards dance? And so when those additional questions I just shared, even if Sophia gave me all of her information, there were still opportunities for me to ask her that what if, and to get more information. And if I did that with 4 or 5 other people on this call, I'd be able to get a good idea of maybe there are some trends that exist across the people on the call. Maybe there's an opportunity for me to spin up a dance class. Maybe there's an opportunity to look at building an app to connect you with your favorite dance in your area. So that's the whole point behind this qualitative work, is to be able to use the insight to then figure out, and so what? Okay, what does it mean? What can I do with this information? Or how does it influence a solution or a way in which we can influence people's behavior or their job? Okay, does anyone want to share? Any groups want to share before we step into the next information? Jason?
I think I might compete and say that Regina was also a great partner. So we talked about hobbies related to across crafting across disciplines. That it's hard to pick just one, and kind of the hobby of selecting different crafts and workshops to attend. We talked about Regina attending stained glass, embroidery, and fabric workshops. And what I noticed a pattern across all three was that they always had an instructor. So I asked, why classes, right? What kind of barrier, what kind of advantage do you feel like the instructor has versus you trying to do it independently? And then also we talked about the fact that in many of these three categories, they didn't have tools or the classes. So I asked them, what kind of threshold would need to be met for you to buy those tools or to attend another class. So it's really cool to just delve into more of the patterns that we learned.
The really smart thing, thank you so much for that, Jason. The really smart thing about what was just shared is the insight or inference that there are no tools involved. And so as you get skilled, or as you become more skillful at qualitative research, you start to infer or look for trends that help you on the fly while you're having conversations with people. They allow you to then probe in areas that maybe weren't on your script or maybe weren't a part of your plan. That's the real beauty of qualitative research, is you start to unpack or identify opportunities that you didn't know going into the conversation. And so when you're conducting qualitative research, you want to be very thoughtful and engaged with someone so that you can take what you're getting from them in that moment and figure out, is there something here for me to go off on that tangent, for me to go deeper and ask more questions that are unrelated to what's on my script, but allow me to see, is there something here? And so once you see that there is something with that first participant, you are now able to take that question into subsequent conversations, and you can see if the conversations will go there. And if they don't, you now have another question to add to your script. Okay. So if you see that people continually share activities of interest that don't have any tools, you can say, do you perform any activities that use tools that you really enjoy? Or I noticed that none of those include tools. Let's talk some more about that. And you can dig a little deeper without swaying them or biasing them to answer in a certain way. Okay, good. Sophia, you wanted to share about me?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome.
I'd like to say first that Jason sharing, what I've learned is to not hold assumptions. So when you say like why classes, like the why classes question it was kind of coming as a surprise for me, because I would assume like you go to classes because you want to improve, right? But maybe there is some other reasons behind it. So that's what I learned from Jason sharing. And this also kind of complements what Dr. Oduor just said about insight as inference. Like sometimes you want to infer a bit, but sometimes you want to hold off assumption. So that's for me, it's a really delicate balance to like explore further to see when to do each. And when I was interviewing Dr. Oduor, I really like one question that Dr. Oduor asked, actually when she was interviewing me, which is, if you have unlimited amount of money, what would you do? So I asked her a similar form of the question. I asked her, is there, so Dr. Oduor really likes cooking and baking, and that's a very homey activity, really warm. And when she talked about it, was like she loves cooking because she loves sharing her food with others, and it makes her really happy if the food came out nicely and people like her food. And so I asked a similar form of the unlimited money question, which is, do you have any goal about this hobby? And Dr. Odo shared that she would love to go to cooking classes and that she wants to buy a scan mixer, which is like automatically help to mix up things so she doesn't have to always do it herself. And also, yeah, I think that was the two things. But the classes, she also shared some of the reasons behind why she wants to go to the classes, because she wants to learn, how to make things from scratch, how to make pasta from scratch, make sushi, make dumplings, so food from different cultures and different countries. So that's like a deeper motivation behind, I just want to improve my cooking skills, but more about I also want to, learn about like open my horizon about foods in different cultures. And from taking the classes, I can more easily approach these kind of skills. And yeah, so times wise, I think that's all I will be sharing. But just want to share one last detail that Dr. Odo really likes drinking a glass of wine when cooking, that I feel really relatable.
See, and that's the thing. I love, love, love the statement insight versus inference. Thank you for that, Sophia. That's going to be a part of my playbook now, because you want to make sure that, we make assumptions based on our own behaviors, and we go into conversations with other people with our biases. Those biases, in all cases, whether they're positive or negative biases, those are biases that sway or impact what we ask, what we see, what we infer. And so that's why you have to ask why, because you're going to base it on what you already know or you think you know. And so you have to talk to your participants to really validate, is my understanding correct or not? Thank you for that. Deanna said that scripts are very scripts are great and scripts give structure, but the interviewee can really offer depth to the interview just by opening up and being vulnerable and thoughtful in the experience. Great interview skills, Jason. Thank you for that. Kudos, Deanna. I think it is very important that you go into, so two things coming out of the dialogue we just had. You want to go into these conversations with what we call a moderator's guide, and it's called a guide because it's guiding the conversation, but it's not necessarily like a checklist. You're not going to just ask questions like, okay, next question, yes or no. Next question, what is this? You're asking questions in a conversational way where you're starting from the broad to warm someone up. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about your job. Describe for me what a day in the life looks like. So you start with those very specific questions and you get more and more narrow based on your topic. Your questions become more narrow or specific to that topic. This is where your 5 W's and an H come in. Okay. So once that person has given you that general broad context, you now have areas within the 5 W's and an H to probe around. Your script should never be, there should never be an expectation that you're reading from it verbatim. Okay. Number 2, I always end an interview by asking someone to the question of, if you had all the money and the time in the world. It might be a question that's geared towards, if you had a magic wand to wave, what would you expect? What would you want? What would you do? That kind of thing. So you want to ask people at the end something that's totally outside of your topic or your question, your line of questioning, just in case they're holding back on something that they're not sharing with you that may be relevant. Just like the Dr. Mom question. Okay, so keep that in mind. Jason said that, when do you think that the semi portion of a semi-structured interview is going too far from your script? Is there something that, such as too much digging? Very, very good question. So if you go too far off script when you're running out of time and you didn't get to your topic. So when you want to make sure that in conversation, in a qualitative interview conversation where you're the interviewer, you want to make sure that you still own the conversation. So that means that when people start rambling and they're talking about, my dog did this yesterday, I can't believe, blah, blah, blah. You want to say to them, okay, let's get back to the topic at hand. Let's get back to the questions, or I'm going to talk about this next. You want to make that a transition where you're owning the fact that you're taking the conversation back. Okay. And you also, it's gone too far in terms of digging. So I once did interviews with people where we were talking about understanding their health insurance. This was a different insurance project. And the questions were about using or people's understanding of the copay versus co-insurance versus what your insurance covers. And we were trying to understand what people do and don't understand about it, when a lot of us don't know what co-insurance is. One person in that interview talked about how she chose to have bypass surgery to lose weight through gastric bypass. And she talked about using her 401k to do that. I did not prompt her to say that, but I realized that's very sensitive and very personal information that she was sharing. And so what I recognized in that conversation was, I probably don't want to dig or probe any more deeply in that, because I still have to share some of this information with my client. And that's another thing. If you're working on a project and conducting qualitative interviews, when you think about sharing that information with your stakeholder, you still anonymize your data. You still refrain from showing video clips. We do audio clips in some instances. Or if you're doing video clips, you're doing them from a distance or with a blur or something that doesn't reveal who you're interviewing. Okay. Any other questions before we move on to qualitative and quantitative? Oh, there it is. Look, it shows up after we're done. All right. So, okay, how many of you are quantitative or feel like you're strong in quantitative research? Quantitative. Okay. So most of you are really strong at the numbers and getting that survey, those analytics, that sort of thing, getting that data from there using R, Python, that sort of thing, correct? Okay. So the real power of qualitative interviewing is when you conduct some sort of quant, or you look at and analyze quantitative data. And like I mentioned earlier, you follow up with that qualitative work. Years ago, I worked with a team where it was a survey that went out to about 1,500 attorneys and law firms in the US. And they were asked to just do an inventory, or answer an inventory of questions about how their business is doing, what practice areas are they in, where are they in the country, just general demographic information. Some of the questions were aligned with, what software are you using today to help you manage your practice and your cases for your clients? So from that data of 1,500 people, once we got the data back, we didn't know what we were going to get back, right? So when we got it back, what we identified was what we call a white space. And that white space was a gap in the respondents where 400 or over 400,000, let me, before I say that, there was a white space where attorneys who were either working alone or with one other attorney, so they were solopreneurs or small law firms, they did not have a software tool that they were using, okay? So what we were able to do was, if we looked at the fact that that was 1,500 attorneys that we surveyed, and we saw that there was a white space in the results of that quantitative survey, we were able to take that and assess the 400,000 solo and small law firms across the United States, that the majority of them did not have a software solution. This became the foundation for a new software in that organization. So we started from the ground to create a whole new solution for law firms that only had one or two attorneys. Okay, so my team and I went out and did the research. We recruited lawyers in different cities, across different practice areas. We wanted to see what differences might exist. Okay, so we did the same sort of work to recruit effectively. The interesting thing in going out and actually talking to them in their law firms, the interesting thing we were able to glean was, not only did we hear from them in their interviews what they were looking for, but in some of the law firms, they had a big whiteboard on the wall behind their head, and they had drawn grids, and the grids had all of their customers listed out, and how much money the person had paid, what stage they were on with their case. So all the data was laid out on a huge whiteboard on the wall. So what is that? That's their spreadsheet. That's their way of tracking their data and what they're doing. So we were able to take that, and this goes back to observations that come out of qualitative work. We were able to not only take the interviews, but we were able to take that data around what we saw happening in their law firm. And we used that to design out the interface for those, or for that software. Okay, so we were able to see what information matters to them, what details. We understood that we thought it was about like managing like the project management aspect of their cases. Guess what they all complained about? And it wasn't about the project management piece. Every single one of them claimed that they were not getting paid on time. So we knew that this new solution must include the billing information as the focal point of every case that they're managing. We would not have gotten any of this out of the survey that went out the first time around. It all came out of the qualitative interviews. The quantitative showed us the what, the qualitative showed us the why, and also the how. Okay, so you want to think about that when you're building something new. You want to start with that work that allows you to validate it's more than a few people. And then once you validate that, you want to be able to say, can I use this to then create something that's of value to that particular audience? Okay. And that's what we just walked through. So when you think about designing or using qualitative research to design, so when you're designing systems or you're designing a program, So you can also use this in program design. You want to think about the fact that your goal in qualitative research is to capture that insight that allows you to then define, are we building the right thing? And then you create and design it. But all along the way, and we talked about this earlier, you're validating your ideas. Whenever you're in a conversation with members of your team and you use words like I think or I assume, that means you're working from an assumption. Just like with scientific research, you go and you define your hypothesis and your experimental method. It's the same thing with the work that you're using to build a program or a process or software. Your research is continuous, and you want to make sure that you build this process of discover, define, design, and constantly validating. You want to build that into the way you work. Going back to that team we worked with, that was 1 year, their project was delayed over a year. They were not working in a way where they were following this sort of process. And so we came in and we also helped them to define a way to collect qualitative work and data and quantitative throughout the process of building something, deploying it out to their customer, getting that feedback, asking questions, refining their design. So you want to build it into the rhythm, and you want to constantly test those assumptions that you have. So that might mean you're experimenting in the process of creating a solution of some kind. Okay. So the really, really challenging part of what I do is getting paid. Like, I can do this all day long for free, but I got to make a living and pay my bills just like anyone else. So the really important part of qualitative research is making sure that you can influence or define the return on investment. So you want whoever is funding your work, whoever cares about whether or not this work gets done, you want them to understand the return on investment of conducting qualitative work. So when you think about qualitative work, you get to the answers faster because you're getting right in front of people. Again, we have about 7 people on this call. If I was to ask each of you about your favorite beverage and what does that beverage do for you? Why do you like it? By the time this call is over, I now have insight for a beverage company. Okay, so that insight is almost instantaneous, and I can see the trends on. Most people don't want a carbonated beverage. Most people don't want an alcoholic beverage. So I'm able to feed that data directly into what that human understanding can do for a solution or taking action. You also guarantee that there's a better fit. Going back to the example of the software where people didn't know that there were features that exist, that is a part of better fitting the need of your customer. And so when you continually go through that process of testing and learning, Jocelyn kind of alluded to it, change some of the language, change the way things link to one another. You might want to design or redesign some aspects of it and see, does the text work better? Is it the linkages or the links that work better? Or is it the design that makes it more effective? You can assume any of those things, but until you actually test it out with people in usability testing or in a conversation, you really don't know. When you think about operations, someone once told a story at a conference I went to recently. She said she was the owner of a really, really famous steakhouse. And she said, she's like 400 employees. And she said, the worst thing you can have is a leader who thinks that when something goes wrong, they should just jump in and try to fix it. She said, I have a 25-foot rule. My 25-foot rule is that I go to the people who are within 25 feet of the problem and I ask them, what is the solution? Okay. Qualitative research is you going within 25 feet of an opportunity or a problem and asking the people in that, what can I do to fix this? Okay. So you always want to think about those of us that conduct research, those of us that look at data, we have our assumptions, we have our biases, but until you talk to the people within 25 feet, you really, really don't have anything but assumptions and hypotheses. Okay. And when you think about overall any program, process, system, tool, whatever you're creating, you retain people. And I think this was brought up earlier. You retain people, or they're more likely to want to stay engaged when it actually aligns to what they need, where they feel understood. So, if you think about marketing where it sounds like it's speaking to you directly, that came from testing out information to see which one resonates with this particular group of people. So you have to do the same, and that comes through qualitative research. Okay. So reflections, when we think about everything that we talked about today, what stood out to you? Like how can you apply this today? I like to talk to things that are actionable. I want to hear what you guys are going to do with this tomorrow. What questions do you have for me? So I'd like to use this time now for us to kind of just have a free form conversation. And if you have projects coming up, projects that you're working on, projects that you just finished up and you feel like you didn't get what you needed, let's talk through those, because I'd really love to give you guys some free office hours on these types of things related to qualitative research. So I'll pause there. Questions, comments? What are you guys going to do differently in applying this starting tomorrow? How can you, or if you don't know how, talk to me about what you have going on and how we can formulate a way for you to use this.
This is not necessarily about a project I have, it's more curiosity because I've been in the academic side for so long.
Mm-hmm.
How do you present your findings to your clients?
That's a good question. Good question. So first off, it always starts with reminding everyone, the audience, what we were looking at, what were you exploring, what were the questions that we were trying to get answers to. So we want to make sure that that's reiterated. And then what methods did we use? Just to remind everyone, because sometimes projects can be, over a number of months. Secondly, we always provide the insights and recommendations. So here are the things we found. Here's how we recommend you address these things. Okay. Those are typically presented side by side. And then we present, here are some concepts. So concepts might be a workflow diagram. They might be a wireframe of what those pages of an application might look like, or pages of a site. They might be different objects and how they work together in a whole macro level system. So we typically try to give them something visual that helps to tie everything that we just presented together and say, okay, here are the different things or little pieces that we found and how you fix those things. But then here's the overall big picture of what you want to do. If we're providing a number of recommendations, we'll prioritize those so that we show them what are low-hanging fruit that you can address today, the things that might take a little bit more time and money to address, and then the things that are long-term strategic that require a big investment, big amount of time and people. And we'll then follow up with, just like in a research paper, where you have in your conclusions things that we did not expect to see, but here are things that you need to know. So these had nothing to do with the project, but we learned or heard or saw these things that you guys will care about, which might be a different project. So we do it that way. Sometimes we present all or some of that in a mural or a mural board so that they have something that's a living, breathing visual that they can work with when we're done. It's a good question. Any other question? And don't be shy. If you have some ideas of what you're looking at in your day-to-day, or things that you have going on, please, I'd love to answer those questions. Ideas about projects or programs that you're working on. Okay. Well, I will give you all I have one last slide. So observe, act, and listen. And I think that's a clear takeaway from what we talked about. Layer your insights. So in what I just described in terms of how we present insights, you want to layer those insights. So you want to give people the micro level or the detailed level insights, but what does that mean for the big picture? Sometimes when we're doing work, we can get caught up in just the question we're trying to answer, that we don't step away and look at how it relates to the big picture. You want to be able to give people both altitudes of information for it to be valuable. Because sometimes when you fix something at a micro level and you don't look around you or step back from it, it can cause more problems if those insights only influenced that one little piece, but you didn't think about how that one little piece fits within a bigger puzzle. So you want to layer your insights effectively, and you want to design with real people in mind. So that is also one we didn't touch on a whole lot, but when you think about designing so if you're designing, and I think it came up earlier, I believe it was what Jason mentioned about specific populations and their needs around wellness. When you think about designing for real people, whether you're designing program, process, system, you want to make sure you're engaging the people that are actually going to be the ones you're designing for. So that's really hard sometimes in academia, where you only have access to students rather, and maybe what you're trying to design is for older adults. You want to try really hard to go and find those older adults, because their perspectives, their context is going to be very different than a student. And sometimes that's the limitation of what you're doing, and you recognize that. And that's okay. But just keep in mind, the more you can do to design with those real people in mind is so much better. So here's my Linktree information. Any final questions or comments before we wrap? I really, really appreciate you guys today. And this information here will give you access to my calendar. You can schedule time if you have additional questions. There's some case studies out there, some of which I've covered, LinkedIn and that sort of thing. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to keep in touch. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oduor, for your presentation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll look to hear from some of you that were on here today if you have any comments or questions for me.
Will do.
Thank you again. Thank you, everyone. We'll send you emails with the YouTube channel and our video recordings, but thank you so much for being here. Bye-bye. Thank you.